to look at where there might be some opportunities for that cross-referencing and being able to bring things forward. So Unit 5 is all about safeguarding and welfare requirements. So we are really honing in on Section 3 of the new early years foundation stage. And that's something as well to remember, that there is a 2025 version of the EYFS, and most of those changes are around safeguarding and welfare. So they talk about diet, nutrition, choking and supervision around eating. They are also talking about individuals and that sort of the security. Just reminding you to put your mics, keep your microphones on mute during this bit if you can. So the safeguarding and welfare requirements, when you're thinking about this, it wouldn't go amiss to have a look at what those key changes are in terms of the EYFS. So there's things around suitable people and employment and so on, recruitment processes, and there's things around paediatric and also around that sort of eating and the minimizing choking and so on. Okay, so overall then, if we look at a unit summary, I don't know if anybody else can hear, but I think there are still some people with their mics on. So if you want to just turn them off, that would be great. Thank you. We just get a lot of echo and feedback when mics are on. So this unit then explores how the early years educator safeguards children, and that's that wider aspect of safeguarding. So it's quite a broad unit. It's not just focusing on child protection. And I think learners tend to think that safeguarding is just about child protection. And of course, it's that wider nature. So we are protecting children. We are keeping them safe. We are putting their welfare needs as a priority here in this unit. But child protection and sort of harm and abuse, whether that's risk of or actual harm or abuse, is an aspect of safeguarding rather than the whole thing. So it includes the wider aspects of child protection, reporting and record keeping. So it's a very broad unit, and that's why there are opportunities for more holistic delivery. Now, what we've been sort of asked to do and what we want to do as well, and I'm sure all of us here on this call are very much aware of the Sustainable Development Goals. So there are 17 United Nations and Save the Children developed these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so when we're looking at this and we're looking at how to keep children safe, we can also think about Sustainable Development Goals 2 and 6. Now, if you're not sure what they are or how you can incorporate those, then we do have, and I can send this on afterwards, but there's an NCFE sustainability resource that's free to access, and that goes through different activities that you can do with young children that might be useful for your learners just to have access to, that introduces the different sustainable development goals and also talks about activities, experiences, and opportunities that young children can do to explore those goals a little fuller. So we're not saying that students are going to be assessed on that. They're absolutely not. But there's an opportunity to bring them in and maybe use some of those as part of assessment where you can. But again, it's something that's not going to be formally assessed. So let's just go through these. And so we are beginning with that child protection side of things. So we're understanding the signs of harm and the different types of abuse and what these are. So we're looking at harm and abuse to include, but not limited to, but the things that are going to be used in terms of what a student needs to know about are those that are on those bullet points there. So neglect, physical abuse, emotional abuse, online abuse. So looking at radicalization and looking at how we can prevent these things, what they mean, understanding the signs of these types of abuse. Domestic abuse, and of course, bringing in there the Domestic Abuse Act of 2021 and sexual abuse there as well. Okay, mic's off, guys. And then in learning outcome 2, we're digging into...
Janet.
Yes, sorry. Should I go back?
What I'm going to do is I'm going to mute all, and then hopefully it doesn't mute you, and then see what happens there. Okay. So mute everyone. Can you still talk? No, so I can unmute. No. Can I hear you, Janet?
Oh,
can I still
what
hear you?
about
Yes.
now? Yeah, can
Yes,
you
I
hear
can hear
me?
you now. Good. Yes.
Hey, okay,
Yes.
brilliant.
Perfect.
Okay,
Thank
so
you.
we've looked at learning outcome one there. Thanks for that.
Okay.
And then we're thinking about that broader legislation, that wider umbrella that we were talking about before in terms of the legislation, the policies, the procedures in relation to keeping children safe. Now, albeit this qualification is English centric, it's built around the early years foundation stage. I acknowledge and appreciate that. So if this is something that needs to be built on to make sure that this is meaningful to the learners that you're working with, then absolutely do so. But you will be expected as part of meeting the criteria and through your external quality assurance processes to meet the criteria that are listed here. So we're summarising legislation, policies and procedures in relation to keeping children and colleagues safe in an early years setting. And I think sometimes we can forget that last bit. So it is very important that we absolutely look at the safeguarding and welfare requirements. We look at child protection, we look at discrimination, we look at whistleblowing. And maybe when you're thinking about all of these things, you add on that aspect of, and what about you? What about the early years practitioner, the early years educator, the professionals working with children, babies and children and families? How do you keep yourself safe? So what and how do your policies show that? So to be able to do this, you're summarising that legislation, and I would very much urge you to look at the early years foundation stage. The legislation that's relevant will all be in there, so you've got one place to look. You're looking at the policies and the procedures that early years settings have, so then your students, your learners are thinking about what happens in their own settings. So yes, this is a knowledge, but they can relate it to what's going on in their own settings, in their own environments, and thinking about what should be happening by referring back to that early years foundation stage. It will be a really good starting point to help with this, especially section 3. But after every one, I would say, and what about you? What about staff? How do you keep yourself safe? Suzanne? Oh, do we need to unmute Suzanne?
Yeah,
Oh.
sorry. Hi, Janet.
Hi.
Do you have to ask the students to write about like the Children's Act or the Childcare Act or any other acts? Would you say that's incorporated in the EYFS? Are we just looking for the student to write about the section 3 in the EYFS?
Yes, I would absolutely validate that, Suzanne, because I think what we're trying to get at here is that sort of making sure an early years educator is aware of what's required when they go into employment. And the main thing here will be about being able to use the early years foundation stage and the legislation that is relevant to that. So we're not expecting somebody to be a historian. It's not wrong if they do, and it's great if they've got that wider knowledge, don't get me wrong. But what we are really looking for as a benchmark, if you like, is that they can engage with section 3 of the early years foundation stage as a minimum. Hope that helps.
Okay, so if they do add like the Children's Act, that's okay.
It's brilliant. So the more they do absolutely offers, and some learners will absolutely want to go into more detail, but then other learners, what's that bottom line? What do they really need to be aware of? And it's definitely this unit is getting to grips with section 3 of the early years foundation stage, because the feedback that we were getting and that the Department for Education were getting and that settings were telling us, and that feedback was telling us that students perhaps when they were coming and they were gaining their going for employment, they weren't as familiar with the early years foundation stage as they would like them to be. So we're trying here to make sure that this document isn't a stranger to them, that they've been using it, that they understand it, and they don't have to be able to regurgitate it, but they need to know where things are in that and to be able to use that to the greater good, really, in the way that they go about their day-to-day work. So that's the bottom line.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. So safeguarding and welfare requirements, child protection, discrimination, whistleblowing. What those things mean, and you're summarising all of those things. The learners will do well to give examples of how they can do that. They can bring in examples of policies if they want to as well, to say how that legislation is being applied in practice and so on. But what's important is that we don't forget that sort of bit that looks a bit like an add-on, but it's so important, and that's about keeping themselves safe. These sort of fall from each other really in terms of requirements. So we're explaining why safeguarding and security systems are an important part of keeping babies and children safe. We're describing our own role with regard to local and national safeguarding policies and procedures as set out in statutory and non-statutory guidance. So we're thinking about here that wider sort of link to what are those national safeguarding policies. What we're trying to do is actually, that's where you're looking at that legislation. That's the summary of that legislation, and how do we sort of implement that. So we're thinking about how we do that at a local level. How do we keep children safe? What is the statutory and non-statutory guidance that we have in our own local authorities? So you can think about that, and also the importance of keeping up to date. So this is what that's looking for there, which brings in line. So 2.3 and 2.4 are really going together as well. And 2.2 is something that could be built into 2.1. So when you're looking at learning outcome 2, you can really do that as a whole. And what that's doing is breaking it down. But just remember, for 2.1, you need to be looking wider than just what you do for the babies and children. It's what you do for you as and your colleagues as well. Okay. And then here we go with 3.1. So understanding an early years educator's role and responsibilities in relation to keeping children and colleagues safe. So you can see how all of these things are building from each other. And as long as you remember the depth of the verbs, so we've had describe, we've had summarize, we've had explain, we're now analysing the roles and responsibilities. So you can clearly see how some of these, through those tasks, and you'll have seen the non-mandatory tasks that have been provided for the knowledge outcomes, we'll be able to bring those together. If you haven't seen those, again, I'm just going to make a note, because Vivette, I'm going to send you that as well in case you haven't seen the tutor guidance, but also I'm going to send you sustainability resource. That was it, wasn't it? I've got to write these things down.
Brilliant, thank you.
In case I start doing something else and then I forget, and then you say, what was that? I say,
Yeah. That's great.
Okay, that's no problem. Right, okay. So you can build all of this together and think about that section 3 and the early years educator's role within that. This is exactly what this unit is all about, an interpretation of that. Now, the be able to's here, it's always a difficult one when we look at safeguarding, especially safeguarding aspects that are very extreme and in terms of risk of abuse or actual harm. So it's important to be able to discuss these signs. So we are not, and we're very much hoping that that nobody is actually able to relate to something that's going on in their setting, because we want these things to be minimized, don't we, and eradicated. However, we've chosen the word discuss there because you can bring forward policies. You can talk about those signs of when a child is in danger or at risk of abuse. Again, you might be able to use some of what you've done already in the knowledge to be able to bring your policies, because what we want in these be able to criteria is the responses to be anchored to placement experience, to be anchored to real authentic experience that your learners are having. So they're discussing signs to recognise when a baby or child is in danger or at risk of abuse. That's a knowledge base, sort of, we need to have that underpinning knowledge to be able to do that. And of course, including online, and the procedures to follow to protect them. And this is where it's really important to be able to discuss those procedures that are taking place in an actual early years setting so that it's contextualized in practice, and that will help you to achieve the be able to. So we're not expecting learners or members of staff to be able to recognize those actual children, and we're hoping that that is not the case, but to be able to talk about and know what to do should that be the case. Any questions on that? Because I think when it's a be able to, it's often quite a tricky one when these are things that are going to be hard to see. This is definitely one that's PD, and definitely one that you can bring through your policies and procedures. Yes, Farine.
So we can assess that through PD, or can we do that through reflective account, or they can't?
Yes, you could use a reflective account as long as when they do, Sharon, they're reflecting on their policies and procedures from
Yes.
their own setting,
Yeah.
and if they submit those, then you've got extra evidence, or the quality assurance process will take advantage of those extra generation of evidence that will imply this is what happens in the setting that I work in or that I'm in placement in. So yes, and that also will help you, I think, to be able to maybe do something like this earlier on, where we were talking about those different areas of abuse and the legislation and summarising that. If you summarise that in relation to what's happening in your early years setting, then actually you're going to be able to incorporate 4.1 and whatever that criteria was. I think it was 1.1, in fact. So you'll be able to bring those together and look at those in a holistic way. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so we're on to those be able tos now, and it's be able to find and stay updated on employer, local and national safeguarding policies and procedures as set out in that guidance. So we're really now looking at what's going on in terms of the EYFS. So looking at the requirements of Section 3 and talking about the importance of staying up to date. The students will talk about training, they'll talk about knowing who their designated safeguarding lead might be. Do they have a process for that? How does that build? How does disclosure and escalation work within their setting? So how do you apply legislation, policy and procedure to ensure safety and well-being of everyone in the setting, of everyone in the setting? So this widens out what we've just been talking about in 1.1, but it doesn't take it too far away from it. So again, holistic opportunities straight away within this unit. So the be able to's, where we're talking about discuss, where we're talking about explain, these can absolutely be used using that knowledge that we've been talking about in the previous learning outcomes. And if we're making good reference to what's happening within an actual early years setting, then this is going to be something that can be met here. So I would say keep the knowledge wide when you're teaching that knowledge and when you're gathering that generation of evidence. And then when you're looking for those be able to's, really make sure that policies, procedures, pieces of, examples of those policies, work products, that's the word I was looking for, that those are being brought from a real early years setting, the one that the learner is involved in, whether they're working there or whether they're on placement, because what that will do is that will allow for that holistic nature. This is definitely an application of knowledge, but it's using that knowledge and applying that knowledge by making those links to the actual placement or employment. We're not expecting this to be something you can see, for example. So work products, professional discussions are all things that can be brought together to be able to achieve that. And if you're referring to those actual work products right from the get-go at the beginning of this unit as part of the wider knowledge, then you'll be able to see how these sorts of criteria can also be linked in to save you doing things twice. So we're looking at Ofsted's whistleblowing policy. So again, very English centric in terms of what we're looking at here, very UK based, but we're referring to policy to discuss Ofsted's whistleblowing policy and what that means. So how do we pass on information, and why do we do that? So this might be about activity that is illegal, risks of others' health and safety, is poor practice, or fails to meet statutory requirements. So it's giving you clues there as to what your learners should be thinking about in terms of what are they preparing for in a discussion. But again, this is something so far that's we've been looking at reflective accounts, work products, and professional discussions in the Be Able Tos. We absolutely appreciate and acknowledge that this is something you cannot see. You might be able to see those policies, but you're certainly not able to see a reference to it or someone following it. Might be examples that you can that the learner might talk about, but this is certainly something that is more about what are the processes that underpin that. And then we're carrying out our own role and acting upon responsibilities, providing appropriate supervision of others in relation to safeguarding and security, including child protection, duty of care, reporting and confidentiality of information. So this is about being able to apply those policies. Now, there are going to be some things that can be applied as part of daily expected practice of confidentiality when filling out reports is likely to be seen at some stage. And those reports can be anything, then they're not that we're not talking about child protection. So we're talking about things that keep children safe. So it could be the physical side of things that we're looking at there. And also so observations, risk assessments, things that we're doing to keep children safe. Those sorts of things can be seen. The duty of care of passing on information. So when a member of staff, a learner, is concerned about a child's development or concerned about a child's behaviour and sort of implying that there might be an underlying concern or issue, again, this is something that might be a reflective account, and it can be based on something that might be happening in that setting. So a learner might be able to talk to their colleagues within that setting to think about reflective accounts as well, and to use some real examples in terms of reporting and confidentiality of information. But I would imagine that over time there's going to be accident sort of forms filled in and so on, and you'll be observing, your learner will be observing that the children as well, and they're going to be making those notes, maybe using online, and so you're talking about the importance of confidentiality. Now, learners are very unlikely to provide appropriate supervision of others, and it does say carry out and act upon. So here we're talking about maybe being aware of how supervision of others in relation to safeguarding and security is actually in place. So do you have, who's your designated safeguarding lead or officer, and what is their role and responsibility? How does that provide appropriate supervision? And making sure that there are checks in place for visitors and so on, to make sure that everybody is safeguarded and that we've got a secure environment. So there are some things that can be seen, and there are some things that, again, will be complemented, if not even fully met, through a professional discussion or a reflective account that's making use of a work product. So you can combine methods within this qualification, and that perhaps is a good example of one that you might need to do that. Some things are very much day-to-day practice, duty of care, routines, confidentiality, reporting, or risk assessments. All of those are things that are probably naturally going to occur over the duration of the learner's time studying. But those child protection ones, maybe not. So, and hopefully not. So those are the things where you're going to actually discuss those. So know what your responsibilities will be. And that's something, again, that might be an element of this learning outcome, of this criterion, that's met through previous work, as long as you're relating it to practice. And then the range, of course, just gives you a little bit of a clue as to what we're looking at. There may be other things that you want to bring in. That's absolutely fine, but these are the things that must be covered. Okay, and there's the link there to the Ofsted whistleblowing policy. So we've got in our heads now what Unit 5 is, and Unit 5, I shouldn't blare it a minute. Unit 5 is just looking at, we're keeping children safe, and we're looking at how we keep children safe. There are opportunities within that unit discreetly to be able to look at the knowledge and meet the criteria of that knowledge, most of it anyway, by referring to what the be able to criteria are expecting, because most of the be able to criteria of Unit 5 is something that will need to be discussed, reflected upon, making use of work products, policies, procedures, and so on. And underlying all of this is that awareness of the Section 3 of the EYFS and how that's being implemented within an early years setting. So that, in summary, is Unit 5. Now, I just want to talk to you about Unit 6. Any questions on Unit 5, by the way? Sorry, while we just come to that point. Okay, I'm going to take the silence as golden there, and we'll move on to Unit 6. Now, you'll see straight away that we've got a natural overlap in a way, because we're talking about health, well-being and safety. And that, if you were describing what is the wider breadth of safeguarding itself, we'd probably come up with some of these words. And that's why I thought, okay, it might be good to just be aware of some of this overlap and how that could happen. So the unit explores the relationship between legislation, policy and procedure, with further focus on own roles and responsibilities for health, well-being and safety of babies and children. So students should be mindful of energy saving approaches to sustainability when considering health, well-being and safety, for example, energy efficient approaches and well-being strategies. So again, we're not suggesting that that will be formally assessed in any way whatsoever, but just where there's an opportunity, we're thinking very much around sustainability where we can, in terms of how we keep how we maintain the welfare of babies and children, how we run our early years settings, basically, is what that's saying. So again, it could well be more and more early years settings are developing policies around sustainability, and so that might just be something that they bring in as an example of a strategy, but it's not something that we would formally assess. So you can see here now that this is referring more to that sort of health and safety aspect. But again, this may be something when you're thinking about LO1 in the previous section, in the previous unit that was looking at legal requirements and statutory guidance. If you put those two things together, you could widen the expectation. If a learner was doing something around policy and procedure that was wider, your assessment could bring in this, and you could be thinking about what we do to keep children safe as far as that statutory and non-statutory guidance is concerned. Again, it's all English centric, and the examples need to relate to this and show this, but if there's other things and other requirements that can be built on top of this so that it's meaningful, we absolutely welcome that. So we're summarising legal requirements and statutory guidance, as well as any non-statutory guidance on health and safety. So we're looking at that sort of legislation requirements, making sure that a student is aware of what COSH means, those substances that are hazardous to health, and how those things are controlled. What about the reporting of those? What needs to be reported? And what sort of health conditions and so on need to be reported, who to and how? And that's the RIDDOR there as well. So we're making sure students have heard of these and how they can be applied. Now, this is something, some of these criteria, of course, remembering that we've had to be very mindful of the early years educator criteria from the Department for Education here in England. And we've also needed to be mindful of changes within the standard for the apprenticeships, not mandated to do a qualification as part of the apprenticeship anymore in England. But those trailblazer defined criteria or KSBs, knowledge, skills and behaviours, do give an indication of something that's up to date. So a lot of these criteria are also related to those as well. So it's staying on that theme, and we're looking at the importance of keeping that physical environment safe. And one aspect of doing that is making sure that equipment, furniture and materials are used safely. So this is really talking about risk assessments in a way, but also in terms of what's in, one of the ways I might do this rather than just sort of bullet point it would be as a discussion point in as underpinning knowledge would be to think about what types of equipment are in or might be in a nursery environment. And they can reflect on what's in their environment, but we can think wider as well, and about how we might use these safely and store these safely as well. So that's something that you could look at in terms of equipment, what kind of furniture. We're thinking about indoors as well as outdoors here. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about here. But we're not expecting a particular list to be, there's not a list of things that need to be covered. This is really just saying why it's important to make sure that you know about how equipment needs to be used, why it's important that things are, put together safely, used safely, checked regularly to make sure they're still safe. So we're looking at a very overarching side of a risk assessment in a way. And they could refer to a risk assessment when they're talking about some of those things there. And the dangers of not being able to do so, remember. So we're not just giving a list of why something's important, but we're also validating that with what can go wrong. So remember to get the full side of that particular criteria. Okay, so understanding the role of policy and procedure in maintaining the health, well-being and safety of babies and children. So these are building on some of those things. We're very much concerned with health and safety, but referring back to Unit 5, keeping children safe, you can't really dismiss a health and safety aspect of that. So you could widen your teaching there to incorporate some of these and avoid having to go back to health and safety. So risks and risk management, thinking about what risk is, managing that through the processes that we have in place, like the risk assessment. Security, so security, physical side of security, sort of outside, inside, online, all of those things. Confidentiality of information we've already talked about, so that might be something that's already been achieved. Suzanne.
Sorry.
It's all right. No, don't apologise.
Sorry, have we not already covered security in Unit 1 and confidentiality of information?
Maybe there's wider holistic opportunities throughout this qualification, Suzanne. So yes, you can weave these things in. So you can look at where some of those things might be have been achieved already. And if you're happy that they have, then you can certainly cross-reference. So feel free to do that. If you're happy in your judgment as the tutor and assessor, then you can definitely make those links. So making sure when you do that, that they're in the context of health and safety, and as long as that's what's in place previously, you can absolutely do that. Yeah, for sure. And then we're thinking about personal hygiene. So we're thinking about those toileting, washing hands, and of course, including oral health as well. So thinking about what's, again, that EYFS is your bottom line in terms of what are the expectations around caring for children and that personal welfare side of things. Meals, snacks, what should we be providing? There's a lot of information here. So using that early years foundation stage, reflecting on what's going on in their own settings will absolutely help to bring that knowledge together. And again, as we look at the Be Able Tos, will really be that opportunity for holistic assessment. So accidents and emergencies, we're looking at procedures, we're looking at the forms you fill in. That might be something that we've already looked at in Unit 5. So again, you can cross-reference. And then most settings, well, all settings should have a policy about what to do, common childhood illnesses. What are the common childhood illnesses? But on there, what are notifiable health conditions such as meningitis and so on? So what's notifiable and what do we do? And how do, and the, the exclusion policies, that's not the right word, is it? What's the word when you can't come back? And you're in a certain time period before you come back and into your nurseries. But you know what I mean. So if a child's got a certain condition, and how long do they need to be cared for at home and free from these conditions before they come back? Exclusion sounds a bit harsh. And then we've got the routine safety checks that need to go on. And of course, the fire drill. So all of these things, understanding the role of policy and procedure, is really, really important to have that wide knowledge base. You might have covered some of these in Unit 5, absolutely fine. And if you're relating these to what should happen, and you're referring back to the knowledge base, and you're referring back to EYFS broad coverage, then you'll be able to use examples of how that's applied within the learner's own practice as part of meeting this, which will also help in some of these Be Able Tos as well. And we'll go on to talk about those in a moment. So this unit is taking that sort of health related aspect a little bit deeper now. So this is thinking about preventing and controlling infection in an early years setting. So describing action to take. So again, this is quite wide in terms of what should happen to prevent and control infection, and then examples that can be brought forward to help with that will also help overlap with some of those Be Able To criteria. And these are very, of course, knowledge-based. You're looking at those common childhood illnesses, you're looking at allergies, you're looking at oral health, minor and more serious injury and medical attention in babies and children. And again, if you've not seen the tutor guidance, when I send that across, that will give you examples of the breadths of some of those things and the sorts of input that you can use for Learning Outcome 5, because it's a lot of information there. Oh, I don't know who that is. Oh, is it Brian? I can just see BP, and that I'm guessing Brian.
Hello, yes, it's me. Hi, Janet. Hi,
Brian.
For this one, if someone has recently done their pediatric first aid, can they use that in any way as their evidence towards these?
They can
These topics are all
use...
covered and they're tested on it as well. Yeah, like, because I deliver the pediatric first aid to our candidates who are on this as well. So just wondering if there's any way to, if I could, there's anything I could do as a witness statement or anything to confirm that they've met these criteria.
Yes, if anything can be directly referenced to what they've done in that sort of knowledge side, well, or practical side of the pediatric first aid, absolutely. There might be some things that fall sort of further out of that. I'm thinking about the dental attention, and maybe looking at that common childhood illnesses in terms of what are they, rather than how they might be presented through the pediatric. So certainly something that complements, and then there might be things that you just need to tie up around that, Brian, just to make sure that criteria here is being met in full, but absolutely complements that. And that's great that they're doing the pediatric. Fantastic.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, this is a big area, and again, that tutor guidance will help you with this. So again, English-centric information, but this is good general information in terms of caring for babies and children and thinking about We're thinking about that learner starting from scratch, if you like, and needing to be able to understand the different nutritional guidelines, and these often change with new learning and new research and so on. The stages of moving on to solid food, complementary feeding, all of that, and the importance, of course, there's a certainly, I'm thinking of 6.5 here, where we're thinking about the recognizing the signs of choking and the action to take, and the importance of good supervision during meal times is so important. So learning outcome 6 is really focusing on that sort of food, nutrition, and the importance of that for a child's well-being. There's you could have a really good practice. I mean, it depends on how you do your teaching and learning and the sort of environment that you're in. But if you have the opportunities to be able to do some practical workshops on this, I think that would be really good. A lot of nurseries will prepare food for babies and young children. So talking about how they do that and how that meets those nutritional guidelines. Otherwise, because it isn't understand, that's absolutely fine. We're looking at the theoretical side of it, but sometimes I think it can really help to be able to look at maybe video clips, think about how this happens, even have a go at doing some of these things. And for 6.5, looking at different ways that that you might see a baby being cared for in terms of feeding, because I've seen in the past, babies being bottled and being propped up, and it makes me very nervous. And so thinking about the importance of that and supervising children when they're eating, very, very important to always stay alert. And it would be lovely. I'm on my soapbox now, but it would be lovely if we had in our learning environments, and a lot of nurseries are going back to this, which is nice to see, is where we've got the member of staff actually sitting with young children. Obviously, babies need that very intimate one-to-one care when they're feeding, but when it comes to older children, there was a time, and I think it's still quite common, where children would get their food and they'd sit down and they'd be very independent with that, which is great, but the practitioners didn't actually sit with them. It's good to see that we're seeing practice where practitioners are sitting with those young children, maybe eating the meal with them, and you're being super vigilant regardless, and you're having conversation. It's a social experience, but it's where safety and supervision is high on the agenda. So again, looking at that and how things have changed over time, but all of the knowledge and where to go to be able to find the breadth and depth will be in the tutor guidance to support you. So that will help you if you need any help with where to go for that information. And then explaining the benefits of physical activities. So this, if you have a physical activity and nutrition coordinator, if you have a PANCO in your setting, that is something that can be talked about, or the role of a PANCO, physical activity and nutrition coordinator. Helpful. They're not mandated. Not every setting has to have a PANCO, but there may be somebody there who is responsible for the physical activity and for children's holistic health and well-being, the importance of movement for physical activity. So we're not talking necessarily of running around. We're talking about the need to be moving, and even non-mobile babies, how do we encourage physical activity and well-being, and the importance of being outside, I think, as well. We breathe differently when we're outside, I think, which just helps with everything. And then we've been talking very much about keeping children safe, risk assessment. It can feel a little bit like we're being quite rigid. And so in this particular area, we're just remembering that we're making sure that children are being able to take those risks within a safe perimeter, and making sure that we're balancing risk and benefits of activities for children, so that children can explore, they can be independent. We don't want to start, really we're not going back to the I'll cut up all your food for you for the 3 and 4-year-old who really is going to enjoy that independence of beginning to use a spoon, a fork, a knife, whatever. But what we're trying to do is make sure that that is a safe experience, and the supervision and risk taking for children is still there. So risk versus benefit. And then all of that criteria that we've just talked about is turned into the the application of that. So the underpinning knowledge and then the application of it. And you'll see here that some of these are very much aligned to discussion, looking at a policy or a procedure. 9.2, for example, we're very much talking about sleep safety. We're very much talking about the importance of having somebody supervise while babies and young children are taking their naps and their sleep times at nursery, and why we're doing that, relating it back to the knowledge that you've had and relating it very much to what's going on in your setting. Could be something that's done right from the beginning with those examples. Assisting others in the safe use of equipment. This is something you should be able to see, 9.1. Don't know why I did it backwards, but hey ho, 9.1 you should be able to see. So assist others in the safe use of equipment, furniture and materials following the manufacturer's and settings requirement. Now it does say here it can be achieved through simulation as appropriate. So if there are things that you think actually I'd like the student to know how to assemble something that is not actually there, then you could. But I think most things will be pretty generic. So I'm just thinking of high chairs. I'm thinking about things that might have harnesses and straps and so on, so that you're using these things safely. I think there are some chairs that can attach and clamp onto tables. There's all sorts of wild and wonderful things that are going on that rely very heavily on the safety side of things. So you should be able to see some of that, and you might want to add the richness to that through simulation, but I would imagine that you're able to see most of those things in terms of equipment, furniture and materials, and how they're used safely in your day-to-day observation and the students' day-to-day practice. These are things, again, that we've talked about. Health and safety, we've talked about so much in this unit so far. Confidentiality of information has come up previously many times, and promoting the welfare of babies and children has come up many times already, just in Unit 5 and now again here. If we've been talking about something and we've been identifying or summarizing or whatever from a knowledge base, and within that we use examples to talk about what's going on in our own setting, then we are being able to put the knowledge and the theory together to be able to achieve some of those outcomes. It does say apply legislation, so we want to be able to see some of these things that are happening, but you could use and plan based on some of the information that the students have already covered and the examples that they've given. So you should be able to see health and safety, confidentiality of information, and how the learners promoting the welfare of babies and children through natural occurring observation. But you will also be able to refer back to what policies are what do we mean by apply legislation, policy and procedure to what you've already been studying, what the students already covered. So we're applying the principles of risk assessment. So we do want students to be able to think about what a risk assessment and what risk management is, and to be able to use that in terms of their daily practice. And again, it should be something that you can plan to see. So a student might not, or a learner might not always do a risk assessment. That might have been done by a member of staff if they're not the member of staff, but they need to be able to shadow, they need to be able to apply that, and they need to have a good working knowledge of how to complete this documentation within practice. So, Lisa. Are you able to come off mute, Lisa?
Okay. A lot of my level 3s are childminders. So when it says shadow, obviously they're not shadowing anyone, but they're doing it anyway. So how can I overcome that? Just a reflective account of what they do.
Absolutely. So I think it's probably more difficult the other way around, Lisa, to be honest. So if that's something that they are doing, it's part of their typical daily procedure, and they're not working alongside another colleague where they would be, learning from them. They're doing it themselves. Absolutely fine. That's not a problem at all. And of course, some of our learners are employed in their settings, and they might also be doing the risk assessment and being responsible for the risk assessment in their own right. Absolutely fine. What I'm saying is not every learner will have that opportunity, and where that's the case, then we're not expecting them, to kind of cause ripples and to upset things, but just to learn from shadowing and knowing that they know what to do, so that they've followed, they've shadowed, they've worked alongside, and they know how to apply that knowledge to complete that risk assessment. Absolutely fine. So it took thanks.
Shadow as well, and other units.
Oh yes, okay. So sorry, if it's shadowing, then that's because we're appreciating that a learner might not be able to achieve that independently. It might be sort of something against the settings policy or procedure, which we have to acknowledge and appreciate. But if that's something the childminder will obviously be working on independently, absolutely fine. They haven't got anybody to shadow, and as long as they've had that wider knowledge, so they know what should be happening, hopefully that will feed through into how they apply, and they can always reflect on, I've learned that I should be doing this, I'm actually doing this. So you could maybe talk about that, Lisa, if there's things that are different between the knowledge and their own current application, and that will show some learning, which is good.
Okay, brilliant, thanks.
Thank you. So in 11.2, we're applying legislation, policy and procedure to protect the health, safety and well-being of children. So we've talked about risk assessment. Food safety and allergies might be something that the student talks about or reflects on. You might not be able to see that being demonstrated during observation, but the student would definitely be able to refer to policies and procedures and talk about how children, how food is maintained, the food safety side of things, and how sort of those individual dietary needs of children are maintained as well. So we've talked about COSH and the control of substances hazardous to health. So you can think about what policies are in place to be able to do that. Where do we store things, and why? And again, that's something that's been talked about before, but now we're thinking about how does that happen in your setting. So there are things you can bring together, and these might be things where you do a bit of a walk and talk. So when you're assessing the students, and you're looking at all of these different things, risk assessment, all these different policies, accidents, injuries, emergencies, where's all these records kept? You could actually do a walk and talk, and the student can show you what the policy is. That might be an online policy that they can refer you to, but also how they keep that documentation and why. So that might be something that they share with you during an actual observation and during an actual placement visit. And then we're outlining ways risk benefit is managed in an early years setting. So again, that is something that you can incorporate with what they've done in the knowledge side of risk benefit or risk versus benefit. This is all around those reports. So these are things that you should be able to see. So we're referring to policy and procedure. We're looking at medication records, special diets, planning, observation, health and safety. So your risk assessments, accidents and near misses when you've had to intervene and changes that might bring, and of course registrations. So these are things that again you might not see all on one visit, but you might be able to see over time. So that might be something where, you're sort of keeping your eye on all of those different bullets to make sure that they are all covered, but that might be something that's covered over time. We're doing respectful care routines. Again, there's an example there in 13.2 of shadowing a qualified member of staff. So this again is a good example, Lisa, of where you'll be able to look at the knowledge and all of that information from LO6 and then reflect on perhaps what's going on now in the world of the childminder and their daily practice, and are there any improvements that you would make? And that might be a way of really engaging with 13.2 from that kind of lone working sort of side of things. So again, these are things that you should be able to see. We're talking about reflecting on policy. So that's something that you can use through a reflective account. That's absolutely fine. We need evidence that the learner is aware of that food preparation and the importance of all of the things that they've learned. How is that achieved in their practice? And then we'd like them to be able to prepare food. But again, there sometimes are, and quite rightly so, some policies and procedures in place that don't allow for that. So they could reflect and they could talk about that and discuss how that happens in their placements. They should be able to achieve through maybe working with another member of staff, that they should be able to plan those care routines and explain how they meet those individual well-being and welfare needs of individual children there. So again, something that can be achieved over time. And a lot of these be able to's are things, sorry, I'll just let that go to voicemail, sorry. A lot of these things that can be achieved over time. Sorry about that. And then being able to implement effective strategies for preventing and controlling infection. Demonstrating effective hand washing techniques, that should be something that you can ask to see. You can talk about that. You can reflect on policy and procedure. Sorry, 14.1, you should be able to see. You can reflect on policy and procedure. I'm conscious of time now. Am I okay, Vivette, to keep going?
Yeah, fine. Sure.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're reflecting on policy and procedure, food hygiene, dealing with spillages safely, safe disposal of waste, using correct PPE. Now, if you can see that happening, great. But otherwise, again, we're not expecting that is something that you will see necessarily in its fullness. So being able to talk on that and talk about that is important. Not all learners are members of staff. They might not all be dealing with a lot of these things. Hopefully they'll deal with spillages safely and they can talk about that. But some of these things you're not going to necessarily see. And the verb there is reflect. So that's absolutely fine. And we're explaining, oh, it is exclusion processes. I don't like that word, but here we go. So explaining those exclusion processes to describe knowledge of common childhood illnesses. We should have talked about that previously in those learning outcomes so far, and that could include maybe some information around an immunisation schedule as well. So these are things that are quite knowledge-based to a point, apart from 14.1. And great if you can see these things being implemented. So you're observing wherever you can, but you can complement these with other methods of assessment as well. And where you've got the knowledge, if you're bringing in what's happening in your placement, in your place of work, if you're employed, absolutely is going to help to meet these outcomes that are skills-based. Being able to take appropriate action to respond to accidents and emergency situations. So we're discussing policies and procedures, and we're talking about what might happen. We already know what it means, and now we're talking about how do you manage that within your own setting, what's going on. So again, combining the knowledge and the skills here by using examples from your own setting to help you meet the knowledge side of things is going to be something you can cross-reference to the skills there. Now this one, sharing information, written or verbal, is something that we've added in here with parents and carers with regard to healthy balanced diets, looking after teeth and oral health, and being physically active. So the importance of, we talked earlier, I think, in previous sessions where we brought forward the kind of what's happening in the early years, what's happening in the home environment, and bringing those two things together. And this is what that's trying to do. It's trying to bring that collaboration and working closely with parents and carers together. We can see that, we can appreciate that. But again, sometimes learners will not have that opportunity to be able to chat to parents, and certainly not to take on board, oh, I'm just going to go and talk to Mrs. King about healthy balanced diets, and they'll be like, who are you, and what are you doing? So I think it could be that the learner is producing something. It might be a little tabletop display, for example, or a little leaflet or something. And that information is something that can be seen by their supervisor at placement or at work, and then something that can be shared with parents and carers if it's seen to be appropriate. So there are different ways that a student can achieve that. It doesn't have to be a sort of, right, I've practiced, I know what I'm going to say to Mrs. King, and I'm going to tell her all about healthy, balanced diets. So bear in mind the wide scope there. And then it's obviously got some information there and about the information from the National Health Service that it's referring to. Again, all of those things are in that tutor guidance that I'll send ahead. Now, the one thing that I just wanted to do, I'm just going to minimize. Can you still hear me? Because I've minimized something and I don't. Oh, great. No, I hadn't knocked things off. Thank you. So these overlaps, you can see overlaps within the units. So within Unit 5 and within Unit 6, the knowledge and the skills to a certain extent are things that you can combine, where things are asking you to discuss and reflect and explain in particular, as long as the examples used for the knowledge are referring to their actual experiences. Now, the two units themselves have got this holistic opportunity as well, and I just wanted to sort of bring that to your attention, really. And nobody's saying you have to do it like this, absolutely not, but it's giving you that opportunity for cross-referencing or within your planning and your delivery. So in Unit 5, where we're understanding legislation, policies and procedures in relation to keeping children safe, in Unit 5, in Unit 6, in LO1 and in Learning Outcome 11, we've got that connection. We're understanding legal requirements and statutory guidance, as well as non-statutory guidance on health and safety. So if health and safety, which is part of keeping children safe, was that broader aspect when you're teaching Unit 5, then you can also think about covering LO1. Just remember the requirements of LO1, which might be very health and safety based. And LO11 being able to carry out risk assessments and risk management in line with employer, local and national requirements, policies and procedures. There's a very strong connection in what we're expecting the students to be able to do. And so that might be something to plan for during the teaching of LO5. Staying with Unit 5, being able to find and stay updated on employer, local and national safeguarding policies and procedures. Again, we've got something there in terms of Unit 6 with understanding the role of policy and procedure in maintaining health, well-being and safety of babies and children, and being able to identify and act upon own responsibilities in relation to health, safety and well-being. So what are these things and how do I achieve them? So again, there may be an opportunity to get that criteria together and think about how you could achieve both of these things, making sure that the criteria for each of these learning outcomes on either side, on Unit 5 or Unit 6, is being met in full, but through one wider or broader task or topic. And then LO7 being able to carry out own role and act upon responsibilities, providing appropriate supervision of others in relation to safeguarding and security, including child protection, duty of care, reporting and confidentiality of information. Looking across to LO12, we're being able to maintain accurate and coherent records and reports. We're sharing information when appropriate to ensure the needs of all children are met. And then LO12 will probably have that list of things that you need to do there. So being mindful of all of those things and those opportunities. So there are lots of opportunities within the unit discreetly, the knowledge and the skills, and making sure examples include reference and make reference to what's going on in own setting is one thing that you can do. And then the other thing that you can consider whilst also doing that is any opportunity to tie in the breadth of expectation between certain learning outcomes in Unit 5 and Unit 6 to avoid that unnecessary duplication, which we all know learners sometimes get a little bit frustrated with. So there we go. I think my next slide is just for questions. So if that's the case, I will come back to you. Let's have a look. I'll
Brilliant.
escape from that and see if I can come back. There we go. So sorry, I've gone over time, but if there's anything that anybody would like to ask or share, I'm here.
Thanks, Janet.
Lisa,
could I just ask? Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Lisa, carry on. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, do you know what's happening with the Panco website? Because you talked about it quite a lot, and whenever I go on it,
Okay, right. Well, I do know there was some conversation between one of the co-founders of Panco and the National Day Nursery Association. So I'll do some digging